Welcome to the 2021 Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism Crossroads Conversations. Hosted by Choon Choi and Jeffrey S. Nesbit, Crossroads Conversations expands upon the Guest Cities Forum and provides a more intimate setting to examine pressing questions centered around design discourse, environmental research, and the status of our profession. In this mini-series, we invite leading designers, architects, and urbanists from around the world to discuss contemporary topics across architecture, landscape, and society. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Nesbit. Here with my colleague Choon Choi. We are going to be continuing our series of Crossroads Conversations, part of an extension of the 2021 Seoul Biennale, paired with partner with Seoul National University. We're excited to engage again another really wonderful conversation. This time with our guests from Territorial Agency. And I will hand it over to Choon to make a brief introduction. And we're going to be doing this today as a much more kind of casual conversation with our guests. So welcome.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, John. Well, thank you for joining us. Well, as a curator for the Guest Cities exhibition at the Seoul Biennale this year, I've had enormous pleasure of working with Territorial Agency. They were one of our first commission artists, and they contributed the Sensible Zone, a new spin-off project, I understand, from their Oceans in Transformation. And it was really great because we have 33 guest cities in exhibition. And Territorial Agency's project was really able to tie all of those cities together into one constellation of the cities that share the same fate in this crisis of climate change. And the way the whole installation was handled was artistically superb, and it's become a very popular spot actually for people to pose for their Instagram, right at the middle, almost sort of replacing the Vitruvius Man with this dial shape of installation. So I'm just thrilled to have John joining us and to really bring a new light on the meaning behind their project. Hello, John.
Hello, Choon, and hello, Jeff, and hello, everyone. Good morning and good night. You're right, we were
joining from three different cities, by the way, right?
Yes, we are joining you from Finland today. We usually operate out of London. The commission of the Seoul Architecture and Urbanism Biennale is more than a spin-off. It has enabled us to think part of the project that we were developing over the last 4 years on Oceans in Transformation in a completely different way. And it's a focus on the consequences on architecture and urbanism of thinking from the ocean.
Hope to see some of the images from Oceans in Transformation as well tonight.
I'll show some.
And can we just start maybe sharing some images from your Sensible Zone project?
Let me start sharing the screen. So I need to first play.
For those of the viewers who haven't visited the exhibition yet, it's centrally located within our main exhibition space.
Can you all see it?
Yes, we can see it very well.
Okay. The Sensible Zone is a new proposition that we're making, and it's a new zone of the ocean, and but it's also a zone of land. It's that zone that interfaces land atmosphere, and ocean. And the idea is that in that very thin and narrow section, here you see the mountains, the volcano in Hawaii, Mauna Loa. In that little section, highlighted in white, between plus 200 meters and minus 200 meters, is the most sensitive component of the Earth system. It's where in the ocean, the photosynthesis is the most active. It's where down to 200 meters, we still have light. The majority of marine life is really down to 100 meters. Beneath that is starts to get darker. But above 200 meters, a new figure starts emerging, which is the technosphere, which is the expansion of cities, conglomerations, supply chains, factories, plantations. It's where humanity has transformed in most intense way the planet. And what is interesting is that it is simultaneously the zone of the planet that is the most analyzed, but also the most extracted. And you start understanding that the coming 30 years, where we will have to somehow start completely transforming our cities, will by necessity have to focus on areas like the sensible zone because of the incredible capacity of these areas to regulate the homeostasis of the planet. Life is where interacts here with the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, and the atmosphere in such a way to maintain inhabitability. This is an image, it's a multi-temporal image of Houston, Texas. And we know Houston is a low-lying, fantastic city. And in blue, you see everything that has been built in the last 10 years. So it's a red, green, and blue. It's an RGB image. And you start seeing that in blue, we've expanded so much over the last 10, 15 years that we've covered areas that are that used to be able to maintain water. And in this black and white area of the image, you start seeing sea level rise at 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial average. So the point is that if we are all good boys and girls and we do meet the minimum goals of the Paris Agreement of maintaining maintaining global temperature within 2 degrees, we'll have so much energy trapped into the Earth system through the greenhouse effect that inevitably in the coming century, the sea will rise well beyond that 1 meter, and that is usually considered at the end of the century. So this is the proposition. We have 30 years to transform our society, to avoid offspring, the Earth moving very quickly to condition of too much heat and becoming uninhabitable. And in the last 30 years, we've done all of this. So the next 30 years, when we need to decarbonize, we should concentrate exactly in that sensible zone, on that small area of the planet that is the most dynamic and sensitive. So the project that we've done with the Seoul Architecture and Urbanism Biennial is an attempt to understand what is happening in this zone. It's an attempt to understand how we can, first of all, depict this area, and second, really try to get to intercept the dynamic of transformations. And it is a zone that is sensitive to transformation, but it's also the most measured, sensed. And the only way to get to really know this area is through remote sensing. So it is the condition both of the looming risk of sea level rise, but also the possibility of rethinking completely how we handle and how we deal with the possibilities of change. So we see that sea level rise is not any longer to be considered only a matter of the coastal interface with the sea, but it's become a way in which we somehow prepare the hard surfaces of a city, the tarmac, the asphalt, the major infrastructure and critical infrastructure for a complete new space. And the idea is that in the sensible zone, we really need to enforce an idea of designing far more clearly spaces for the biosphere, spaces to capture carbon through photosynthesis, through wetlands, through mangroves, and prepare ourselves for this incredibly catastrophic sea level rise that will come because of the rise of global warming. So this is a very quick introduction to the sensible zone concept. Now, it's a very thin layer, and it's based on very complex discussions that we've had with both oceanographers and Earth system scientists and geologists, and most importantly with urbanism. What we are really interested in is the fact that in the last 30 years, we've done so much. We built across the entire world on the coast. We used to be a species, humans used to be a species very much scattered around all temperate zones. And now we've become an urban and coastal species. More than half of humanity lives within 50 kilometers of the coast. And actually, 90% of humanity lives at beneath 200 meters. So this is where sea level is going to rise and disrupt all our supply chain, all our infrastructures, all our cities. And the proposition is to rethink completely our relationship to the ocean and prepare more space for water, more space for nature, but mainly more space for the biosphere.
John, it's incredible work. First of all, I have to say it strikes me as both a kind of cartographic description of a particular. You're really working three-dimensionally because you're talking about a section and a plan as it relates to forms of urbanization, which we think of certain kinds of sections, but I think it's one of the best examples I've seen where we can think simultaneously about a particular kind of volume of space, which includes air and atmosphere, and I very much find that to be productive. The one thing that I also grapple with is this sort of, it's almost reminds me of some photography work where the photographs are depicting something that is often remote and invisible, and yet it's sort of right, and it's sort of remote and invisible yet in plain sight. And as you've rightfully depicted, so much of the world's populations live in this zone, and so we occupy that volume. And I myself am from Houston and occupied that volume quite often. The other thing I just want to throw in there, I'm just riffing here. The other thing that I realized is that zone isn't just about occupation, but transfer of resources and materials across those particular zones as forms of trade, ports, and so forth. But I want to congratulate you on the incredible body of work. And so one of the, I guess, to lead to a question, to get the conversation going a bit, is how do we grapple with the fact that, first of all, the imagery is beautiful, it's extremely well captivating, and so how do we use it as a tool to call on for terrestrials to act in better ways in this zone or even outside of that zone?
Wow, what a question, Jeffrey. The Houston image is really for you.
Thank you.
No, it's not true. We prepared a long time ago. It's actually the first image that started making us think of this area. And the point was really when the hurricane struck, I think it's already 4 years ago, and you had this incredible floods in Houston, and none of the news, none of the description of those catastrophic events was describing them as sea level rise. And when we started producing that that image, it was part of the beginning of the project on oceans that we did at Territorial Agency. We're doing a Territorial Agency with TBA 21 Academy. And so we started as architects. What is the sea level rise? And we started very basically collecting a digital elevation model of the world. And the digital elevation model of the world that is usually available is from 1986. It's produced by the Space Shuttle topographic mission. So the Space Shuttle was orbiting and produced a topographic model, which is very rough compared to what we have today. And then we filled it up. We basically looked at science and said, okay, next century, if we are at 2 degrees, this will be is the range in which we have that sea level. And then we looked at the image, and this is the point about image, and we were shocked. We were in despair for maybe half a year when we saw the image that we basically all agreed upon, and it's our aim. We are going to have, if we manage to meet our aim, which is the common aim of humanity, to maintain temperature beneath 2 degrees, the entire coastal areas of the south of the United States will disappear. The East Coast will be completely transformed. The West Coast, in a lesser extent because of the mountain ranges quite slopely, but the Bay of San Francisco will basically have to completely be reconfigured. And this is only looking at the United States. If we expand the view onto Europe, where I'm from, and we start seeing the complete transformation of the European cities. The project was in Venice, and we seriously were dealing with the only infrastructure in the world that is dealing seriously with climate change in Venice, the MOSE, the mobile experimental barriers that open and close. And that is not considering future sea level rise of the magnitude that we're facing. So we started really being shocked by our own image, and which is a multi-temporal image produced by the archives of Landsat, the incredible program that allows us to have basically a photograph every 7 minutes of part of the planet since 1972. And we were really utterly shocked. So that's the first part of the image effect, shock. And the second part, of course, becomes anger, because we are architects and urbanists, and suddenly you realize that all that we all have contributed in thinking that expansion. We showed I showed just Houston, but you can imagine Hong Kong, the Pearl River Delta that has so dominated our thinking in the beginning of the 2000s, the entire expansion of and transformation of the Chinese population into an urban population happens all within a few meters of altitude. Korea has completely transformed, in particular, its western coast. And we can continue. And of course, the African coast and Bangladesh and all the Southeast Asian, all of this is shocking. And we get angry because we've supported all of those efforts to think the city at such a magnitude. But then you have to move on. And we need to move on very quickly from anger and shock. And we need to think really, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to transform? And this is where I think the images need to be sensual in a way. They need to be attractive so that we gather as many people as we can around them. To do what? To transform those areas, because we've done so much in the last 30 years. I mean, we cannot simply dump it. We are all proud of what we've achieved as humanity. But now we need to do it in the next 30 years in a completely different way. So that's the role of images, that at the beginning it's shock, and then it's need to propel. And so the work that is really interesting because it originates in the art world. It's not a piece of art, it's really a piece of architecture, I consider it. In the entire Oceans and Transformation is an architectural piece, but it operates within the art world. And the collaboration with Disembodied Art Contemporary, which is the organization that commissioned us this project, and we've been collaborating with them in this research, has been really fundamental in making us understand through the work of Francesca Frontis and Marcus Reimann and the curator, Daniela Zimmer, how to not inform people, but how to make sensitivity the clear center part of the project. And I think this is really interesting for us. It has made us understand that it's no longer an issue of informing people, making people aware. It's about becoming sensitive to. So art thinking is a major important element, which brings back, in a very strange way, architecture as it used to be. Architecture was always at the intersection and crossroad of art, technology, science, economy, ecology. It was always how we thought architecture. And so this is where the collaboration with the scientists comes back.
It makes me think of Konstantinos Daxiadis, Greek architect, who was making the early drawings of the rapid urbanization across the world. And you're sort of doing that in a contemporary context with contemporary tools and more accurate sort of data sets. And I appreciate your
definitely that sheer artistic quality of your animation and the images, like you said, and it's exactly operating the way you intended in our Biennale right now. So people are drawn to just the artistic quality of your work. So they position themselves in the middle of your work. And as they spend more time just looking and observing, they start to just really delve deeply into this issue that you're bringing up, and just having this visualized in front, and having all this scientific data backing up all these images. It just stimulates so many parts of your brain. It's just incredible.
Maybe too much. It's
maybe too much. Just the anger starts to build up.
For those who have not seen it, in Seoul, it is displayed on 7 very large television screens, and they're basically the same as big screens that you will see in public spaces to watch football and watch the news, that hanging over the bar, and very large, 75-inch screens. We tilted them, and we've displayed them vertically in a circle, and the screens are slightly inclined, and so they allow somehow people to approach the incredible resolution of the screen very close. And the point is that there's so much data, and at 4K resolution at 75-inch, we still have to scale down a lot of the elements. But the images are really strange because they are part of, or in that sense, they are a spin-off of the work on oceans. They are scientific data sets coming from a multiplicity of research centers. And each one of the research centers is dealing with incredible science, but very rarely they collaborate. Very rarely they bring things together. And so the idea is that the images, yes, they gather the public that experiences them, but they also gather the researchers that produce the data itself. And so it's a collaborative device. It's an architecture that enables, when we then play it out towards the scientist or the conservationist or the activist, it enables new forms of interaction and collaboration. So it's a very strange piece for us, because it's both an exhibition of work done, but it's also a device to produce work. In that sense, it's very important that it's public. It is in the exhibition of Seoul. It is displayed really for public. But what we have been doing with it is, in a very strange way, you mentioned Doxiadis. I actually really think it was not Konstantinos Doxadis who made those drawings. I really think it was Jacqueline Terret, the unnamed author of all the terms of modern architecture. Anyway, Doxadis was also gathering a lot of people around these studies. He was bringing together anthropologists, scientists, geographers, economists. Of course, he was most notoriously funded by the CIA, and his practice was one of information gathering. Today, I think our role is very different. He has a beautiful, Doxadis has a beautiful little sketch at the opening of the book that has those drawings, which is called Echistics, which is a name for a new science that he developed in order to study the human settlement. And it's a little drawing that shows two graphs, the forces shaping contemporary inhabitation and the knowledge about those. And basically, when there's a lot of forces, the knowledge decreases, and when it's calm, the knowledge increases. And that is the opening of the book. And it's a modernist idea. It's a real modernist idea to know more in order to act better. That is such a stupid thing, because we produce so much. We haven't acted better at all. The point is really how to get away from that idea of instrumentalization of knowledge and the instrumentalization of the entire architecture. Architecture has turned into a technological diagram. We think it always in order to transform and to apply it to conditions. And by doing that, we've distanced ourselves more and more from the planet, from our own environment. So it's a very difficult project, because theoretically it is so close to Doxadis, so close to Buckminster Fuller, but at the same time, we want to be away from it.
Sure.
And this is really a strange place for us to be. And but it's also a very prolific space, because it enables a lot of recollections and a lot of reevaluation of architectural practice.
Right. John, if I may ask you a question about yourself and Ann-Sofi, about your experience, because it seems like you guys are really operating between certain kinds of fields, which would include architecture, of course, urbanism, but also geography and science. Is there I'm just curious about your own histories of how you got into this kind of work.
Let's put it, it's like this, that in at the fall of the Berlin Wall, I was beginning my architectural studies in Milano, in Italy. And my teacher, my maestro, was Stefano Boeri. And we started a series of discussions about the fact that in the news, the major evidence of architecture was on the front page, and the bribing scandal that after the fall of the Berlin Wall ripped the Italian political system apart. The Italian political system was a very complex Cold War balance of power between the large coalition of Christian Democrats, liberals, and socialists and social democrats, and the Communist Party. And they always were balancing each other. The Communist Party never got in power. And as the Berlin Wall fell, Italy was torn apart because of an incredible scandal of how politics was financed. And politics was financed basically in a way that involved the public system controlling the transformation of cities, and that check and balance became a way of transaction between the public sector and the private sector that was evidently based on bribes. But what was interesting was that the city that was described when there was a scandal, that building was done by paying a bribe to that particular politician, that bridge was done. That city that was described on the front page of the newspaper was not the city that was described in our architectural books. L'architettura della città, the architecture of the city of Aldo Rossi, does not describe contemporary city. It describes a city that is compact, it's articulated in, it's actually the center of Milan. what we were experiencing was the city that had incredibly sprawled across the entire northern plain of Milano. So what we started, and Stefano at that time really led an incredible effort. It was among the many young architects and urbanists trying to describe that condition that someone like Bernardo Secchi started describing as città diffusa, the diffuse city, which is not really the periphery, it's not really the sprawl that we have in America, but it's a completely different setup. So that's how I really started. And we went on to establish an organization called Multiplicity, which brought together scientists, economists, photographers and geographers and artists to think the contemporary city, and outside of that Italian stale tradition of typology and urban studies, but at the same time intersecting with it. That is really where I started realizing very quickly that what we are dealing with is a different meter. And we are dealing with a level of coherence that is no longer that of architecture at the level of the block, the urban morphology, but it has expanded so much to cover an entire part of a country. After that, I've continued in a similar way in Switzerland with the ETH, which is the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, and in Zurich. And ETH at that time we established a spin-off, so to say, of ETH, like a pirate institute in Basel, together with Jacques Herzog and Pierre Desmarons and Marcel Meil and Roger Diener established Studio Basel. And there we looked at Switzerland as a urban phenomenon. That was my interaction with Switzerland. I just had finished with Multiplicity, a major study on Europe that was part of Mutations, the research exhibition that brought Harvard GSD and the work of Rem Koolhaas together with Multiplicity and Sanford Quinter to think what is happening at the global level to the city, what we used to call the city. And so in Switzerland, I took some of that experience and developed then, together with Ann-Sofi, these new forms of representation of Switzerland, the Matterhorn or the mountain, as an urban phenomenon. And that's really my trajectory. And then Territorial Agency is born out of that trajectory with Ann-Sofi when we were commissioned by the Dutch Ministry of Water and Infrastructure, a master plan to deal with a part of the Netherlands that was at the center of planning in the 60s and 70s, but had gone under the radar. And so the idea was how to take all of that information and make it applied to action. And that's where we established Territorial Agency as a practice. And since then, we are operating out of London, where we teach at the Architectural Association at the AA, and we have our team. And actually, the beautiful images are more the work of our team than ourselves. No, it's Eva Ibanez, Sahir Patel, Maria Rajenovic, and Maximilian Schob and others that have operated those images. So that's more or less the trajectory. And of course, in that trajectory, being in academic circles and at the close proximity with the art world allows multidisciplinarity to operate very quickly. And that's where we started our work on the Anthropocene around the year 2004, 2005, looking at concepts of nature. We encountered the notions of the Anthropocene, which then becomes, in 2012, a major project with Armin Lincoln and Anselm Franke with the Anthropocene Observatory, and then collaborating with Greenpeace, the Museum of Oil, and with Bruno Latour, pushing it forward. And the current work is also part of thinking with Bruno Latour, his critical zones. So the sensible zone is in addition to the critical zone concept, which is a concept developed by contemporary scientists to start thinking in the whole systems by looking at the areas that is most critical for the sustainment of life. It's a very continental idea. It doesn't deal with oceans so much, but it has to do with, let's say, with the water catchment areas, the relationship between lithosphere and water and life. So complicated project.
Bits or little sneak previews of these projects that you just mentioned, a series of these projects that I've been following as a fan, but do you have some clips?
Yes, I could show you a couple of images. It's more, it's very complicated to share screen here. I need to do a weird procedure. Let me go here now. Now, the recent thinking of territorial agency has to do with this new figure in the making, and it's an hypothesis put forward by a scientist. But let me come to it by asking this simple question that is, how heavy is a city? And this is a question that is so short and so simple, but to answer it requires really a lot of revision of many assumptions, and has to do, first of all, is not how heavy is a building. So what is a city? How much does it extend? What do we include? Do we include plants, animals? Do we include the material fluxes that go through it? And it's a question that we've been asking also as a division of labor, together with the geologists of the Anthropocene Working Group, which is a group of geologists and stratigraphers in particular that are gathering all the scientific evidence for to sustain the officialization of the hypothesis of the new geological epoch, promoted and put forward by the Nobel Prize Paul Crutzen. So how heavy is the city has for us a very simple answer: 30 trillion tons, which is a very big number. 30 trillion tons is the amount of stuff that the city has become. It is the equivalent of 29 centimeters of rubble everywhere. It is in the order of magnitude comparable only to the biosphere. And it uses a much of the biosphere. And so this is a part of the work that we do with the scientists. We start understanding this new figure. And Peter Haff, a paleontologist, thinks that this is a new figure. It's a new paradigm of the Earth. And just to make us understand that the technosphere is a new component of the Earth system produced by technology, and its function is to metabolize fossil fuels. Atmosphere, land, and ocean used to be in complex equilibrium, in particular if you think of the carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle, the water cycle. But the burning of fossil fuels, which has started in the Industrial Revolution to be intensified, and after the World War with the expansion of petroleum, has become a massive problem. So from within, the technosphere appears as an extension of what we do, of what humans do: architecture, technology, expansion of infrastructure. But the hypothesis of the scientist, of Peter Haff, is that it is now an autonomous system of the Earth that is quasi-self-organizing. So we are a component of it. We are part of the technosphere, but we are not the drivers of it. It is self-organizing. So this is the major question for us. How do we become sensitive, not to nature, but to the technosphere, in order to make it do what it's currently not doing, and that is recycle its major debris? All the components of the Earth constantly recycle. The lithosphere recycles rocks through the tectonic plate movements and erosion and the interaction with the atmosphere. The life recycles itself constantly with decomposition and new life. The technosphere basically is plantations, forests, infrastructures, farmlands, chicken, pigs, and humans plus the energy and material structures that are sustaining it. So at Territorial Agency, collaborating with our friends at the Anthropocene Working Group, we started this project looking at the technosphere, asking this question, how heavy is a city? And trying to delineate it, because it's not any longer a condition of figure ground. It's no longer a condition of thinking, for instance, in this case, a dam, that this is the technosphere because it's obviously part of technology, while the rest of the valley is nature. It's all technosphere. The dams have transformed the flow system of rivers. The organization of life has been modified by humans in such an extent and magnitude. And so the project is really how to give it a form, how to give it a shape, how to make it visible and attainable to action, because it's climate change and climate chaos that we are all living through is becoming so difficult to operate with, because our image of the space of operation is one that is outdated. It's the one of the Holocene, characterized by stability and calm, clearly defined boundaries between urban and rural, and so on. So the project is at Territorial Agencies how to make this more clearly visible. To do what? To act. So we have divided Territorial Agency in two sides. And there's a series of labs that are all about trying to understand the material impact of this curve, the carbon dioxide concentration at Mauna Loa, the healing curve. This is the last 2 years, ending on Friday. That's the entire breathing of the Earth, the entire record of Mount Mauna Loa, the CO2 in the Northern Hemisphere. And this is what we're describing. So this is 1957, the beginning of the work of Keeling, Scripps Institution, and that's the rise of CO2 levels since the burning of oil, and that's industrialization. But just to understand in a slightly different timescale. So that's the description that we've seen and we've all discussed. In the last 1,000 years, we see the dip, beginning of the work on the small ice age in the beginning of the scientific revolution. And these are the last 10,000 years. This is where architecture, urbanism, and civilization, music, literature, accounting all developed. It has been very stable climatically, and now we are in this new phase of the Earth. So the question is really how to deal with that, how to make it visible, how to make it attainable. And in a little bit more dramatic way, these are the last 800,000 years with the different ice ages. We are now in a situation that we have not only never seen during the Holocene, we've never seen ever before. So this is the project, really, how to make it a project of visibility, a project of operation, and these are just a sneak preview of what you find in Seoul. It's a series of images that indicate multiple levels of data. For instance, in red here you see images of everything that has been built in the last 10 years, and this is the incredible vitality of a place like the largest urbanized delta in the world, the Louisiana delta of Mississippi. And it's a project that tries to make things, the technosphere, visible. And in order to do that, we operate together with scientists, with activists, with philosophers, with thinkers on the ground to imagine those things. And below here you see everything that will be underwater and disappear. It's disappearing, and this land that is disappearing faster than it takes us to speak about. The question is really, these are snippets of the Sensible Zone project. It's an attempt to show that we can imagine this space in a different way. We can imagine it as wetland. We can imagine them as carbon capture. We don't have yet maybe the full imagination that is public to get into it. These are some of the images that we've been developing. Of course, this is a project that starts in Venice. So this is the Città Diffusa that I've been mentioning before. So this is the city of Padova. That's the city of Venice, the little thing there. This is the lagoon. In green dots, you see all the, it's 1 year of sensing vessels at sea. So these are basically all the vessels in the northern Adriatic. And all of this area is what is called the Città Diffusa. This is Padova, over here is Verona and Vicenza. And it's the Palladian area. And now, when we talk about sea level, we talk about a barrier here. But what we start thinking in the sensible zone is that we need to imagine that that interface between land and water that I've just been describing needs to be completely rethought. So we have, of course, one of the largest man-made water systems in the world, the Murapadana, the north of Italy, which is the richest part and productive part of Europe, and it is now getting hotter and hotter. It used to be an area of fog. Fog has almost disappeared, and this is the area we start seeing in black that will be lost at 2 degrees Celsius. So now we are talking about the Moses there. I think that we need to start thinking of more water in these areas. We need far more water in the hinterland of the sea to prepare ourselves for decarbonization. We need to capture more water. We need to think it in a completely different way. So this is the, you see, it's images that are architectural, that try to understand the city in relationship to its context and the different areas that are interacting. Start seeing them in the corner Milano. And these are attempts to see the city in a different way. There is a LiDAR scan, high resolution bathymetric data of the lagoon. What is interesting maybe of Venice or Seoul is that Venice over 1,000 years developed an incredible city in basically the mud flats in the lagoon, and developed simultaneously the artificiality of the lagoon and its incredible political a republic. A city that is a city-state in a republic. So, contemporary Venice is the opposite of a good example of how to deal with water and particular. It was great that we stopped now and the big vessels coming in, but there's a complete depletion of the lagoon system. But historically, it's a great model for what we need to do in the next 30 years. So we need to develop cities that organize institutionally the project of dealing with the sea level rise. And this is the hypothesis of the photography, to transform these areas into spaces that politically are re-engaging with the multiplicity of life forms, seagrass, mud flats, that enable capturing of CO2, where we are now just pouring all the pollution into the sea. That is part of the larger project of Oceans in Transformation that we are very proud as just won the European Commission Grand Prize for Innovation in Society and Technology through the arts. And this is where in Venice the project started. And that line of light is indicating future sea level rise, the one that I've indicated previously in the images. It's a pulsating line of light on the facade of Church of San Lorenzo, which has been restored by TBA 21 Academy into a space dedicated to the promotion of safeguarding the ocean through the arts. And it's looming over an empty Venice because of the pandemic. And during the, I'll show you a quick video that introduces the project.
Hello, my name is Marcus Ryman. I'm the director of TBA 21 Academy and its home, Ocean Space. Ocean Space is a new center in Venice, catalyzing ocean literacy, research, and advocacy through the lens of art. It's a collaborative platform that brings together artists and scientists, architects and activists and researchers to together foster ocean imagination and ocean action. And as we're in Venice, we chose for the second exhibition of Ocean Space, we chose to work with an architecture collective called Territorial Agency and present their work Oceans in Transformation, which is the culmination of a 3-year long-term research commission that started with the investigation of sea level rise. And what better place to investigate sea level rise than in Venice? So I invite you now to follow me into the exhibition and see the work.
Territorial Agency has been investigating the Anthropocene, the age of the transformation of the planet, for about past decade or more, trying to contribute to the amount of knowledge produced by various scholars about this particular age and the transformations it brings about. Oceans in Transformation is an attempt to unravel the mechanisms of transformations on the planet from an oceanic point of view, meaning looking at the Anthropocene from the oceans. So the question they are posing initially is, how can we sense, how can we make understanding the transformations of the oceanic, whereas the ocean is an area that is invisible, that doesn't afford us a view into its body, if you want. So what instruments, what possibilities of knowing do we have in order to develop an image of the oceans and its transformation? One. And secondly, how can we bring together the various ways of knowing, the various sciences, investigations, data collected on the ocean, so that they form a body of knowledge and are syncretized as one coherent story of the ocean. And in order to do that, they have both developed an aesthetic representation. These are the fields of images and compositions that you see behind me, but also a conceptual repertoire that is very important for us to understand, because it is the ideas, the understanding, the ways of knowing that perhaps also lead us to a better safeguarding of the ocean in our future.
So the project is really that we present in Seoul is a in-depth analysis of one of the components of the Oceans in Transformation project, which is this multi-layered investigation in the different ways of knowing the ocean, which is the most important component of the Earth. 71% of the Earth is covered by the oceans, and yet we know so little of it. We never think in the ocean. So the line of light that is intimating respect for the future ocean is also a way in which you have to go under the future sea level in order to enter an oceanic space where relationship between distances, between time scales, between transformation processes need to be reevaluated. And the project creates these images, as we mentioned before, to recalibrate the relationships between different ways of knowing, and it's what we call a public diplomacy. And we create these spaces to bring together different groups, institutions, researchers, and research questions, and different traditional and indigenous cultures to engage in the composition of a new common understanding of what is happening. And there are ways of thinking with scientists, with activists, with politicians, with the general public, how to act on this most sensible and important component of life on the planet. And it gathers an incredible amount of information and data from artificial intelligence, modeling of ocean currents and ocean circulation, acidification of the product, overfishing, and tries to intercept these transformations with larger changes in what we call the world system. And so the project is organized along a series of trajectories, of tangent lines that are non-continental or that span continents and oceans and intersect both the tipping points, the most sensitive components of the ocean and the Earth system, where it intercepts the long-standing processes of systemic transformation of the world system, the cohesive modes of organizing power, economy. So we have trajectories, for instance, that cross the Atlantic and intercept contemporary deforestation in West Africa and in the Amazon. And along the same trajectory, we have to remobilize information about the Black Atlantic of slave trade and what it means to decolonize our knowledge. And this is a project that has multiple reverberations, and we are very proud that the most important one at the moment is in the format of the exhibition in Seoul. It is part of a larger series of Territorial Agency working on activism, thinking architecture as a form of activism, not to fill a gap in knowledge or a gap in sentiment, but an activism that means an action onto a rapidly changing world. And what we are activists for is really a reorganization of the relationship between material spaces and energy fluxes and our political organizations, the politics, the city needs to be reorganized. So this is a sneak preview. Some of other projects, of course, will take much longer. And
very good, John. Thank you so much for sharing the work. I think it's a really powerful message, both to our students across our different continents, to remind ourselves that architecture isn't necessarily, or architects working on questions of urbanism isn't necessarily at the scale of the street section. It's a broader exercise in understanding forms of planetary urbanization that we now have the ability to more properly recognize and therefore translate as important contributions as we move back into our kind of architectural scales, and the fact that, you know, I think more and more today there are architects and educators working in various different contexts across the world that are better informed at these kinds of practices, and you and Ann-Sofi definitely demonstrate that. So it's wonderful to see the work.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And it's been, I must say, the work has had an enormous contribution from and generosity from the Seoul Architecture Biennial. And it's a real pity that the technosphere has interfered and intruded on the possibility of being together. The pandemic is nothing else than a moment when everyone became aware, really, of the way in which we depend so much on this set of infrastructure to keep us alive. And we would have been together celebrating architecture and thinking architecture. And I hope that the digital equivalent is just a temporary one.
Yeah, but for everyone who is able to visit, I think they should definitely come and then see this installation in person to scale. And Seoul is about 50 meters above the sea level, but the installation itself, the exhibition, is about 10 meters below ground. So you kind of get this feeling of this submerged condition that you're trying to simulate. So I think this whole idea of sensible zone is very appropriate or very fitting for the installation venue as well. So I really wish we could meet and in person and discuss this further in the future.
We shall.
Well, again, John, thanks for joining us. I hope we can stay in touch. And if you're ever back in, the Texas region or in Houston or even in Cambridge, I'll be jumping back and forth. Do let us know. Just as a concluding kind of remark, there are questions that I certainly think we could carry this conversation on much longer. There's lots of questions I have for you.
Jeffrey happens to be an expert on NASA, the landscape of NASA. So all this data that you've been using is enabled by this space technology that then they go in loops. So we could actually talk.
He's the maestro. I've been following your work at a distance, Jeffrey, and Choon.
Oh, good.
It's really nice that we get together like this, and it's definitely a conversation that I would like to continue, also with member of the audience. And if you have questions, get in touch with us. It's easy. There's our website is territorialagency.com, and there's a link there that you can send us a message. It's been a real pleasure to be with both of you. There are some questions on YouTube.
Actually,
do we want to entertain? Do you have time, John? Do you want to entertain questions?
I have another maybe 10, 15 minutes I can be with you.
Maybe I can read some of the questions for you, if I can figure this out. Yeah, I guess there is one question from a viewer. Is this an artistic representation of environmental problems? So what's the conclusion of this artistic project, specifically the Ocean and Transformation Project? So I guess in addition to provocations and inspiration, I guess what conclusion may we draw from your project is the question.
First of all, it's not an artistic representation. I think that is an idea that of images existing as an interface between a world and an interior. And it's a modern way of thinking. And images exist by themselves. And they have a status and a position in the world that is equivalent to other entities. So we don't think of these in any way as a representation. And they are basically, I don't even know if it's art. I actually would refrain from calling them art. They are a device through which we bring together different knowledges and different knowledges of the multiple oceans that we encounter. Everyone learns very early on that there's one ocean, one global ocean, one gigantic body of water that circulates on the planet. But there are actually as many ways of knowing the ocean as there are research groups and cultures. And so we propose that the oceans are plural. And we create these spaces led by the art world, where we bring together scientists, activists, and researchers. And one of the outcomes is the identification of calls for action. For instance, one of the clear situations is that we've depleted completely the fisheries, and we've completely transformed the coastal seas. And it's not by chance that it's all segmented into exclusive economic zones to protect what is left to fish. And one of the calls that comes out of the work to get inspired by Professor Jeremy Jackson, professor of emeritus at Scripps Institution and the Smithsonian, is to propose a sanctuary in the high seas, not in the excluded economic zone, not in the coastal areas that are under national jurisdiction, but in the areas beyond national jurisdiction, to stop all exploitations, in particular fishery, but deep sea mining and mining of oil. And it will allow the fish to find a space to replenish and regrow, and it will allow humanity to get more and more bigger fish. They used to be gigantic, they become smaller and smaller. And currently, the economic importance of the fisheries that are caught at high sea is ridiculous. Now we catch big species at high sea, mainly tuna, which is just a luxury fish. It's not really providing humanity with sustainment. But we really need to stop deep sea mining, which has been advocated in a malicious way as being the only possibility for the for the technological transition to renewables, in particular the mining of metals and from nodules. And so there's a series of actions, of calls for action that are already operating at regional and international level that we've been part of shaping. The oceans are plural, as I say, it's oceans, and there's not one single initiative, but I hope that the work has contributed somehow to the beginning of a new understanding. And it's a great thing also that the United Nations has declared the coming 10 years as the decade of ocean science and for a sustainable future. So this is one of the contributions to that decade. And I hope that you come and engage with a new science on the oceans.
Definitely different direction from 50 years ago when Bucky Fuller was creating a gigantic dome to save the Earth, where spaceship Earth becomes even more efficient and resilient, but being more mindful of all these changes that are happening around us. Thank you very much for answering the question from our audience.
Thank you for the question. It's a very important question. That's it, I think. No, there's no more questions.
Oh.
Great.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Jeffrey and Choon, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for your time. So have a good day.
Hope to see you soon.
Very
Goodbye.
good. Bye-bye.